Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined, as always, by Gene Henley here on the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. We really appreciate you all tuning in, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening in on your podcast app of choice. We really appreciate it. If you are on YouTube, give this video a like and subscribe while you're here. We're going to have a couple other videos coming out here soon. Should have a Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast episode coming out on Friday sometime. And it should also have a Vol basketball breakdown for Tennessee versus South Carolina this weekend, the second time these two teams have played this season. I think that should be a win, Gene. We may get into that here in a second, but we have other things to talk about. But again, we're available every week at podcasts as well. If you want to listen to audio only format, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, you name it, we're there. Check us out. And we really appreciate all the support from Vol fans and Lady Vol fans alike for this show and the Lady Vol show and everything else we do. So again, thank you all so much. Gene's our first episode in February. March Madness is very close to being here. And since last time you and I spoke, Tennessee's played a couple games, won one of them, lost the other one. The first one, well, I guess technically both were kind of close. The A&M game was close for a little bit. But Tennessee played, kind of as we predicted, a very ugly defensive heavy game against the Texas Longhorns, and Rick Barnes was returned to Austin, Texas. And Tennessee lost that one 52-51. They were down 17 points, I think 16 points with like 6 minutes left to go in that game, and then suddenly went on a went on a tear to go and tie it up at 51 all, and then a foul call on Josiah-Jordan James with 6-ish seconds left sent Texas to the line. They'd missed like 3 straight free throws at that point, and they made one of the 2 they attempted to give them the 1-point lead. And then James goes down and misses the 3 at the other end. And that's how Tennessee loses. And then they come out against A&M and have probably their best offensive performance of the year, considering, as we talked about, like you don't want to count the Tennessee Martins or ETSUs or whatever, but looking at high major opponents, it was probably this one or the North Carolina game you can point to as Tennessee's best offensive performance against a power, high major program. Tennessee goes out and wins 90-80 at home against A&M in their third game against a Texas opponent this season. Finally won one, and now Tennessee has won 4 straight SEC games, Gene. And it's another thing we talked about, that this schedule for the SEC for Tennessee was going to get easier once you got into February. Tennessee started out the SEC slate 2-3, but you look at the games they played, it was at Alabama, they played at home against Ole Miss, at LSU, home against South Carolina, at Kentucky, at Vanderbilt, and then they played home again against LSU. So, I mean, that was not a easy start to the SEC schedule for Tennessee, and it made sense they were 2-3. You played 3 really tough road games at Bama, at LSU, and at Kentucky, and those are your only 3 losses. Granted, one of them was a blowout loss to Kentucky, but I mean, Tennessee's only losses this year, they've lost 6 times, and all 6 of them have been against quad 1 opponents, or another way to put it, top 40 basically opponents. And they're really top 30, I guess, really necessarily, looking at where the teams are still ranked with Villanova and Texas Tech and those teams, like they're top 30 losses for Tennessee at this point. So anyway, before we get into kind of bigger picture looking ahead for Tennessee and what the remainder of the schedule looks like, I got a bone to pick, Gene, not with you, but with some Vol fans out there, I guess. I had seen some of the bad mouthing of Josiah-Jordan James die down for a little bit because he's been playing better. And then I saw it really, really ramp back up on Saturday/Sunday because of the way the Texas game ended. When they had the play drawn up, it went perfectly. You had Zakai Zeigler zoom down the court. He went into the lane, drew 2 defenders for Texas. I think maybe a third was about to run over there too. You had James wide open for 3, passed the ball to him, and he just missed it. It was a wide open shot. It was a good shot selection. That was basically exactly what you wanted in that position, and he missed the shot. And I saw a bunch of people say, why James? Why don't you look over to Vescovy over there in the corner? Why didn't they draw that for somebody else? Why was Kennedy Chandler on the bench? All those different stuff. And Gene, I know you're going to have a lot of points to make because you and I both are. I've been a little harder on James, I guess, than maybe you, but it's just because you and I both are big believers in Josiah and think he's a good player. I think he gets sometimes undue, I guess, not hatred, it's a strong word, undue criticism from fans in a lot of respects. But he's been playing very well. And in fact, in that game against Texas, heading into that 3-point attempt, he'd been 3 of 6 on the day. And he was the reason Tennessee he sparked that comeback for Tennessee. He hit the 3, I think maybe 2 threes in that run when Tennessee had a 16-0 run. Him and Zakai Zeigler were the 2 guys that sparked that run. Vescovy was 0 for 5 in that game. I don't think he'd made a 3 at that point. So literally, Josiah was your hottest 3-point shooter and your best 3-point shooter in that game. And he's been shooting the 3 ball better lately. I'll pull up the stats in a second. But Gene, I am just tired of the Josiah-Jordan James hatred. It seems like whatever this guy does is not enough. I mean, I don't know if people want him. I think people, because he was a 5-star coming out of high school or whatever. And you and I've talked about this before. He didn't control that ranking. He didn't put those expectations on himself. He didn't. At the same time, though, I mean, none of these guys, well, I don't say none, but a lot of these guys don't put those expectations on themselves. But he was never billed, to me, in my opinion, ever billed as a guy who's going to come in here and average 15 to 20 points a game. He's a guy who had a lot of tools and could do a lot of different things. And that's what he does for this team. You look at what he's done. Look at the A&M game. He had a season high in 14 points, and he would have had more if he hadn't had 4 fouls in that game and gotten in foul trouble early. But 14 points, 8 boards, 2 assists, 5 steals, and a block. I mean, he does about everything for Tennessee. He's a guy that could lead the team rebounding. In fact, he might slowly lead the team rebounding. He was at one point, but he's a guy who he had a 5-star ranking. He's not a 5-star player, in my opinion, when it comes to scoring, but he's one of the best glue players I've ever seen in a Vol uniform and just in college basketball in general. So I just wanted to kind of rant a little bit and let you an opportunity to rant too, Gene, because I know where you stand on Josiah as well, but I'm just tired of the hate, man. I especially that Texas game, I thought, he was Tennessee's best 3-point shooter in that game. Vescovy had yet to make a shot. I know he's consistently Tennessee's best 3-point shooter overall, but I think people just look for reasons to be mad about Josiah-Jordan James, and it really frustrates me.
Right. Well, first, it's the internet, so people just they just run there with their opinions. I think if I have an issue, it's the fact that they were just down 1 point, if I recall. I think instead of pointing to the player in the missed shot, I think the bigger issue is, why are you taking a 3 in that moment? You could have maybe attacked the basket, maybe try to get something there. But I mean, you said it. I mean, I went back and watched the play, and Zeigler had no options. If you see the play, and look, you can do certain things against Tennessee Tech that would actually, that would work in that moment, in that instance. A team like Texas, guess what, folks? A team like Texas is not going to give you Vescovy. They're not going to give you that option to hit that shot, because that's the person, that's the person that you don't want taking a wide open shot with, especially with the game on the line. I understand, people don't like him. Get over it. He's there. And if you look at his skill set, even just coming out of high school, you're going to give that kid a 5-star ranking, because he's 6'6". He's got a good build. He was never a great scorer. They forced him to score his senior year, and he started scoring some. But at his best, you thought he was going to be a 6'6" point guard. Do people remember the career of J.P. Prince? Because guess what? He's not all that different. I mean, if you just look at some of the measurables, look at some of the numbers. It ain't like, when J.P. Prince was growing up in Memphis, when he went to Arizona, everybody's looking at that point. I mean, he wasn't too far removed from a guy like Jalen Rose. And that's kind of who you're thinking that he could possibly be. The big point guard, big left-handed point guard that can do everything well, but nothing great on the court. And that's essentially what Jalen Rose's career was. And I loved Jalen Rose back in that day. If you're my age or a little bit younger or just a little bit older, you loved the Fab Five, or you hated them if you obviously under certain circumstances, and that's on you. But that's kind of what Josiah is. He's a guy who can do a lot of things well. He does nothing poorly. Yeah, if you're quiet because you don't hit game-winning shots, well, guess what? Kobe missed? Don't let the 25 or so game winners he hit distract you from the fact that he missed a vast majority of those shots. Like you're gonna take. I mean, if you're Tennessee, you got exactly what you wanted because you knew that Texas was going to take away Vescovy. You knew that your best option was the trailer, who, to be fair, was 3 for 4 from 3 up to that point. It was a wide open shot. He's just got to make it. He missed it, but I don't know. I don't really keep up with Vol Twitter because I think that's just more of a creation of people excited because they think they made something happen a few years ago. I don't keep up with them on that. If people don't like him, then that's not going to change. But they're never like if he has a good game, they're going to say that's what he should be doing. If he has a bad game, they're just going to just jump all over him. He could score 28 points in a game, and people would just simply say should have been doing that all year, his entire career. That's what that's who people are. And again, I think a lot of people who complain, I've said this before, a vast majority of people who watched Josiah-Jordan James play prior to coming to Tennessee would probably say, yeah, this is kind of what we expected. But people who didn't watch him play would only simply look at the 5-star ranking and say, well, we got one of the 10, 15 best players in the country. Why is he not out here? Why is he not Zion Williamson? They're not. That's not the type of player he is. Like, that's the type of player you're going to get at Tennessee. I mean, that's, specifically at that point. If you think of where that program was, just a few years ago, yeah, it was, people expected that Tennessee team to be good a few years back, but, number one in the country, I don't think anybody expected that. So when he signs, yeah, there's hype, they're a top 10 team, whatever, but you're not going to consistently get those guys who are just going to be so dominant that you're just like, wow. You'll get a Keon Johnson who, because you got Josiah and because of the type of player he is, you got Keon Johnson. Because of the type of player Josiah is, you can get a Jaden Springer, Kennedy Chandler, guys like that who, Huntley Hatfield, the guys who have the star ranking. But the star ranking does not mean an awful lot. Folks, please stop just looking at the ranking and do just a little bit of homework, because I'll tell you this, and this is why I know, and I know this hurts feelings, but I truly don't care. This is how I know that Tennessee is still going to be considered a football school, because if this was a football player who had a 5-star ranking, you would know everything. You know his mama's name, you know his daddy's name, you know about the game he threw for 326 yards as a sophomore and won the state championship. You would know every facet of this kid. But basketball is like, oh, 5-star guy. You don't know what it means. You don't even have a clue. It just means he's one of the top 30 prospects in the country. Now, players, prospects, all that stuff, like how great they are, how dominant they are offensively, all those things, you don't understand that, and that's fine. But don't get mad because he's been the same player for 3 years. It's like getting mad at Russell Westbrook because he can't hit a jump shot now. Guess what? He never could. That's like getting mad. Seriously. That's like getting mad at Kobe Bryant because he passes the ball in a crunch time situation. He never did. Like, you're getting mad at guys for being who they are. And if you just did just the smallest amount of research, you would have known exactly what this guy was. Just a little bit of homework. I mean, they told me the coach made him score the basketball when he was in high school. Like his junior year, he didn't have to, because I think there was some other prospect. I don't remember the kid's name. They had some other prospect on the team, or maybe a number of prospects on the team, where he could just be the 6'6" point guard who's just such an elite talent. But his senior year, they lost like all those other guys. So it was just like, Josiah, we need you to do this. We need you to. He goes out and averages 29 points a game. But the question is, how's he getting those points? Because guess what? If you're a 6'6" point guard in high school with that build, you're shooting a lot of layups and dunks. It ain't very hard to get 29 points, even a per game in high school, when maybe you're not surrounded by an awful lot and you're just as physically gifted as he is. He's still a fine player. He missed a shot. Get mad at Vescovy for not making a shot all game. There's so many other things to get mad at. Don't get mad at the kid who literally kept you in the game, along with the guy we're about to talk about next.
Yeah, and I actually think that JP Prince comparison isn't too far off. I liked that you said that. I was like, ooh, that just from what I remember vaguely of his stats and obviously him playing too, that is interesting because I think Prince was more athletic overall, just kind of as a player than Josiah. Josiah's athletic also.
Yeah, he was taller.
He was slightly taller. They're
Yeah.
basically same build. That JP Prince was listed at 6'7", 205, and Josiah's 6'6", 207. So I mean, they're
How many stars? I'm pretty sure JP Prince was a 5-star player.
I think he was. If he
Pretty
wasn't,
certain.
he was like
No,
he was a very
I'm
high
pretty certain.
4-star, nothing else.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why why I believe he was a 5-star, because guess what? You're going to give the 6'6", 6'7" point guard a 5-star
Yeah,
ranking.
he was a
That's how
5-star
this
in
thing
Rivals.
works. That's how this thing works. Like I mean, folks, listen. The two guys that are bringing you all this hot content on this podcast, we have a clue as to what we're talking about. I'm trying to tell you, like, it's not that far off. I mean, it's like it's not a bad comparison. And look, if he can just ultimately have the career that JP ultimately had
Mm-hmm.
had in Knoxville, that's a great career. I mean, he'll probably get close to 1,000 points. I don't know if he'll take his 5th year, but he seems to love Knoxville. He seems to love University of Tennessee, even though it doesn't love him back. He gets treated like Jared Garantano all the damn time on the I mean, because of the one thing he doesn't do. When you look at, and I'm not comparing, because look, man, I covered Garantano. I am not saying that. Trust me, folks. I'm just saying that's how he gets treated. Uh, that's how he gets treated essentially. And I'm like, man, I just don't think I don't think that part of it's fair. If you're going to criticize the game, criticize his game, but stop bringing up the stupid ranking every time he misses a shot, because that's dumb. I mean, I'm just being honest. That's dumb. Like there's so many other places you could go over the course of of a contest as to things they don't do well. Can they defend? Because you can point out every single thing that some player does, and I'm not giving anybody a pass whether they're 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. If you can't do something, point that out. But don't say, well, he's just a 3-star, so why should we expect that from him? I'm not putting kid gloves on anybody. I'm just saying, I'm also not sitting here going to punch Josiah-Jordan James around, because the kid who, again, literally brought you all back in the game, along with, Zakai Zeigler, is the one who, the head coach who said, we're going to go with the hot hand, drew up a play for, and it wasn't like it was an air ball.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I saw the play. It was a miss. And the whole team went over there because they trusted him in that moment. But yet, the fan base, they want to sit here and crucify him. They just
And
doesn't make any
and
sense.
to be fair too, it wasn't like the entire fan base, and there was plenty of people who I saw also, fight back and say, hey, he was 3 of 6 before this. So yeah, we're talking. I still think about, I think a minority of the fan base. I think it's just a pretty large percentage. Still, it's more than it should be. To go back to the JP thing, I think looking at from what I'm watching from JP and just looking at the stats too, he was a better kind of slasher cutter to the basket than Josiah is. But Josiah is a better 3-point shooter than JP ever was. Better free throw shooter, better rebounder. But JP is a little bit better overall of a scorer. And he also, like you said, kind of a point guard role. He averaged his last 2 years at Tennessee, he basically averaged 10 points, 4 boards, 3 assists. He shot 12%. He didn't shoot a bunch of threes, but he only attempted, I think, 24. He had 24 his second year at Tennessee, but shot 12% from 3. It wasn't until his last year at Tennessee where he shot 32% from 3. He only attempted 34 threes that year. So, he wasn't a 3-point shooter, but he was every year consistently shooting in the upper 50s, lower 60s in his 2-point shots. But yeah, JP was probably a better overall scorer, but still wasn't a guy who's averaging 15, 20 points a game, but better overall scorer, better cutter to the basket. But man, I would take Josiah as a defender any day of the week over JP. And I think JP wasn't, from what I remember, wasn't bad on defense. I don't remember now. I didn't pay as much attention to defense back then as I do now. But I mean, Josiah is one of the best defenders on ball and just overall from a versatility standpoint that Tennessee's had in a long time in college basketball, at least. Like he's just a really good defender who a lot of the stuff he does doesn't show up on the stat sheet even. And what he does show up on the stat sheet is pretty impressive. Yeah, JP had like a steal and a half per game. So he was not bad at that, at least. But that's what Josiah averages. He averages last year 1.4 steals per game. This year 1.6 steals per game. This year he's averaging just under 6 rebounds. He averaged 6.5 last year. He's averaged 7.5 to 8 points per game every year he's been here so far at Tennessee. Again, he's also not been healthy. He's had, I mean, I know it's like I'm making excuses for him. I'm not. I mean, I'm just trying to give context. And I also want to point out that, yes, this year, the start of the season was brutal for him when it came to shooting. And you and I had talked about it in a podcasts way back in December and early January, how we wanted him to stop. He just had become like exclusively a 3-point shooter, and he wasn't making the shots. We're like, he needs to change his game and become aggressive, because when he has been, that's typically when Tennessee's had more success, is when his offensive game has been effective. In the first 11 games of the season, and of course he missed a couple of those due to injury too, but still in the first 11 games he played, he shot like 22% from three, and it was not doing well, and had one game, I think, where he had scored double figures. Over the last 7 games, though, and this includes the game where he played 4 minutes against Vanderbilt. Take that game out, and his numbers look even better. But over the last 7 games, Gene, he's making basically 39% of his threes, 38.7. He's averaging 9 points, 6 boards, 1.5 assists, 1.5 steals. And he's making, again, 39% of his threes and 53% of his twos in 26 minutes per game. Again, take out the Vanderbilt game, and he's averaging double figures in points. He's averaging over 6, maybe even 7 rebounds a game. And he's making probably close to 40% of his threes, because he took 1 3 in that Vanderbilt game before he got hurt and left after playing 4 minutes. I mean, this is a guy that's, knock on wood, he stays healthy, because that's been the biggest issue. But this is a guy that, if he keeps those numbers up, I mean, Tennessee is a different team when Josiah is effective on offense. So just look at the games they've played, he's been effective in. The only ones they've lost has been that game against Kentucky that they were going to lose no matter what happened, because Kentucky could not miss a shot, and against Texas. And again, as we just said, he and Zeigler were the 2 guys that willed Tennessee back into that game, thanks to their offense and their defense. So, I mean, I know we came out with a lot of energy and a lot of passion here in the opening of this podcast, Gene, but like, I
do want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I do want to just jump in. Like, I mean, I don't think. I think the biggest pushback, not against you, but against those who kind of go against him, is just that. And I don't know. Again, I don't hear what all is said. I think my biggest pushback is that we make the leap because of certain things to some overwhelming, he's not a good player. When the reality to me is, again, I do think there's things he has to, sorry about this. So I think the biggest frustration I have is we make the leap that he's not a good basketball player. Like, he's flawed. Like, I think the kid should be a better finisher at the basket.
Yeah.
I do. I do. Like, I think that's like the biggest knock for me, is that he doesn't finish well at the rim, and that you can get some easy baskets. You can create some mismatches with your size, but because he kind of shies away from contact, sometimes you don't get some of those easy baskets, and you come out shooting. Whereas I think sometimes maybe he could start a lot more like with the inside. Go with the inside part of his game, maybe take a couple of shots, take a couple knocks, get bumped around a little bit, finish a couple times, get to the free throw line, and that can maybe get you going for the outside part of your game. Like, that's just, again, let's nerd out for a second on this. Like, that's how I think he could really open it up, but instead he kind of is aggressive, catching the ball and shooting from outside, and then maybe, pull up jump shots, a lot of that stuff. And I just don't think he needs that. So, like, I mean, I'm not sitting here acting like I don't watch the kid's game and I say, oh, well, he's flawless. I don't know what everybody else is thinking. I just understand the kid's value to the team, and how without him, you're going to figure this out. Like, I've made some silly comparisons over the past. I think I've said Draymond Green, guys like that, because there's guys who, I hear Jalen Rose call them basketball casuals, and I like that term. There's guys that basketball casuals will say, well, why, blah, 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 blah. Why are they this? Why do y'all think they're that good? Well, they're just riding the coattails. But then you don't have those guys in, and you start to see their impact. You see the impact when they're not in the game. Like, I mean, in the NBA, the Warriors are struggling right now because Draymond's been out. He opens a lot of things up because of all the things he does. So when you're building a team with those contributions in mind. And when you lose them, you have to adjust. And Josiah does some stuff differently. He can guard 5 positions. He can bring the ball up court. Like, he's spotty shooter. I'm not saying that, like, I mean, you throwing the numbers out. I've never liked his form, but I mean, he's a spotty shooter. He can make some shots, shooting 30-something% from three this year, whatever. Like, so again, I'm not going to act like the kid is flawless. Like, I think what happens on the internet a lot of times is there's zero nuance. You're either great or you suck.
Yep.
And so what I wanted to do, if I always said, if I'm going to talk basketball, I'm not going to do it in some sort of hot take, some sort of hot take thing. I want to sit here and discuss it. And so, like, you can watch this game and understand that there's things that he has to work on, and maybe moments that he has to be better. I'm not counting the last play. I'm not counting the last play, because basketball is a make or miss sport. Everybody's crucified because they miss it, and why would Rick Barnes draw the play up for him anyway? But there are things he has to get better at, situational stuff he has to be better at, maybe be a little bit more aggressive, getting the ball in the paint, going to work on smaller guys, maybe take some bigger guys outside. Maybe that's one way he could be effective. I don't know. But I'm also, like I said, I'm just not doing the thing, and obviously you're not either, where we hop straight into he stinks, he can't shoot, get rid of his scholarship. I'm not saying that's the majority. I highly doubt that's. I mean, like, I've said my stuff about the fan base, but I do understand there is a good faction of just basketball fans. I've had some reach out to me over the past few years. Like, there's a good faction of just basketball people who understand, and they're not saying some of the stuff. They may be frustrated he missed the shot, but I think they understand it. So again, I don't want to sit there and paint with the broad brush, kind of like, maybe some of the fan base wants to do when he misses a shot. I don't want to paint with the broad brush. I'm just simply saying, as we have this conversation, that like, he's not flawed. I'm sorry, he's not perfect, but he's not flawless, if that makes any sense. Like, he's somewhere in between. He's a basketball player.
Right.
They're all like that. And I don't think that his star ranking 3 years ago is indicative of the type of player that he is, because he's just a really good player. It's just he doesn't do anything great at all.
Yeah, like you said, if you want to blame anybody for the star ranking, blame the services who ranked him a 5-star. Can do the same for JV Prince. Like you said, though, if you're a 6'6" guy who played point guard and played it really well coming out of high school, I mean, chances are they're going to rate you top 30, top 25, top 20 in the country. So, I mean, still, he's been, again, when he's been healthy, he's been a consistently really good defender, probably elite defender. And he's a guy who's going to be, to me, I think he will be an NBA player. I don't think he'll ever be a full-time starter or anything like that. He's a guy who's going to be a bench player. I think he'll be I think he'll be an eighth guy in the league.
I think he'll make a lot of money overseas or something, but
I can see that too.
Like, there has to be, like, at that level, if he had played point guard at Tennessee, I could see somebody wanting to take a shot on him. But again, I think, at that level, it's what do you do well. I'm not sure there's a pro on that team. I'm not sure that there's an NBA guy. Maybe Huntley Hatfield. Chandler will probably get drafted. He may end up being a G League guy just because of his size. But, and I could be wrong, but I mean, if people want Kennedy Chandler to be a pro, probably need to track the career of Sharif Cooper, who played at Auburn a couple years ago. Like, just see where that kid's at. And that kid was a better player his freshman year than Chandler's been. And Chandler's been really good, especially as of late. I think he's had some really good moments. But so no, I don't. Like I said, maybe Huntley Hatfield if he develops.
You don't think James could turn into I mean, this is reaching a little bit, but to a certain extent, you think James could turn into someone like a Tony Allen? I mean, he never was like a guy who had a lot of offense, but of course was an elite defender.
No, I'm telling you, I think his NBA comp would be a Draymond Green, but Draymond Green was a second-round pick. Draymond Green didn't play his first couple of years because Mark Jackson was trying to develop him as a basketball player. Then once Draymond fully developed, you got him into a situation where you're like, okay, we can figure some things out. He's not Ben Simmons size, so he can't be Ben Simmons. He's a better shooter than Ben Simmons too. But he does some of the same stuff while not being as ball dominant. I think from a basketball perspective, you could be saying Draymond, like but that takes time
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard. If this makes any sense, it would be hard in 2022. Draymond was really good in college.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people realize how good. Like I think that was a Final Four team Draymond's senior year, right? And people don't realize how good he was. Josiah's college career won't be that, and that career got him drafted somewhere in the second round, and he had to develop. So I don't know if you draft that. How high do you draft that? Does that, or do you draft that and stash it in the G League for a while and like let him develop? There's so many different things there. Like again, when I watch that team, I'm not 100% sure that I see. There's not a guaranteed pro. Like Chandler may leave after this year, and that's fine. And best luck to him going forward if that's the case. I guess we would. I think a lot of people would be surprised if he came back at this point.
Yeah.
And Tennessee's in pretty good shape at that position going into next year, but they, maybe Chandler gets a chance somewhere. Maybe somebody likes him. I never bought in. We talked about this at the beginning of the season. I never look. The size is an issue to me. It's an issue to me, and there's not many guys that size, at that age playing in the NBA. There just aren't. Chris Paul. You can say Chris Paul, but Chris Paul is 36 years old. He's nicknamed the Point God, and if you just watch how he controls a game, that's special. Like I understand the accolades, the championships, which is what we judge everybody by at that level. Like that hasn't been there, although they've been good last year and this year. But that's still, in terms of just knowing where to get everybody, that's a skill that has been, honed over 16, 17 years in the NBA. I think Chandler, again, I think that could be another guy, but I'm not willing to say anybody on this team that I've watched play basketball this season is a pro. And I think they've got good players, but that's, when we're talking about that level of the NBA, that's a lot. That there's a step there. There's just a step that there's certain boxes that have to, that's why even a guy who I guess is kind of a head case and a Monty Bates will still pop up on lottery stuff. That, guys like that. At that size, you've got to be Davion Mitchell. That's the guy from Baylor. You've got to be Davion Mitchell type good. You've got to be explosive like a Darius Garland, who I think is taller. You've got to be Colin Sexton, who I think is a little bit taller. I don't think that Chandler is quite that. As far as Josiah, I'm not sure if there is a comp. Maybe I don't know if there's a comp at that level for what he does. And it's hard to get excited about the triple single guy. That's kind of what Draymond Green is. Oh man, we draft, imagine try to get a fan base excited because because you drafted a guy who averages 7 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, and plays good defense. At least some guys make sense. At least the guy who averages 25 a game, he makes sense, even if he stinks and even if he played on a bad team. Imagine signing a guy out of high school who averages those numbers. You're not going to get a lot of excitement from that. And you could say, well, you just don't know, you just don't understand and all this, that, and the other. But those are multi-million-dollar corporations when you get past high school, college and pro. They know what they're looking for.
I'm glad you brought up Kennedy Chandler because really quickly before we get to Zakai Zeigler here in a second, I'm curious to your thoughts on Chandler's year so far at Tennessee, because I do see a lot of potential and I see a lot of athleticism and I see a lot of creativity on offense. He's one of the few guys that Tennessee's had the past couple of years who's able to create his own shot and do things on offense that most Tennessee's players can't do. But I also see I don't know if he's trying too hard or if he's just plain reckless. There's so many times he's made turnovers where I've thought, I don't know what he was thinking there. He was trying too hard. Like there's been the last couple of games. I remember early in the year when they would try this, he would try the hammer play where he, run to the baseline and try to pass it out. There were a couple of times I thought he's not careful. He's going to step out of bounds and create a turnover. And then lo and behold, the last couple of weeks, he's done that 2 or 3 times now where he's gotten too close to the baseline and stepped out of bounds and they whistle him for it and call him a turnover. Or he's had a bad pass coming out there for the hammer throw, hammer pass, whatever you want to call it, hammer play. It's not just that though. I mean, there's been times I feel like he is pushing really hard on fast breaks when I'm just like, we may have talked about this last episode too, where I'm just like, you don't need to always go 100 miles an hour on those fast breaks. Like you need to slow it down sometimes and observe. And because there's been so many times he's gone and tried to do a layup himself and get the shot blocked or just missed the layup completely, or tried to pass it back out and try to force a score on a fast break and turn it over. I'm curious your thoughts on Gene. Is it just a matter of him just pushing because he knows he's really good and he thinks he can do things that he just can't? Or is he playing? Is it just him playing reckless, or is he just his basketball IQ low? Because I think, I don't know. I like a lot of the stuff he's done. I think he's a really good player, and I think again, people are maybe being too harsh on him, saying, "Oh, who's a 5-star? He needs to be did this and that." But we just talked about that with Josiah. Obviously, Chandler's a better scorer, and I think overall has more talent. But like, to me, I don't know. I think he's good. Like you said, I just don't know, like with his height and measurables and whatnot, for when he's going to go into the NBA, when's he get drafted, all those different stuff. But I'm not sold. I don't know. I still think he's a great player. I'm just trying to figure out how to put into words like what I feel about him, because there are just so many times I've watched him and thought, I know he's getting coached, and because he'll do it, and Rick Barnes will get on to him on the sideline, and he'll sit there, he'll absorb what Rick Barnes is saying, and sometimes he'll talk back with him, but not talking at him to like argue with him really or whatever. And I know he's been coached up in practice, and he's talked about before why he has come to Tennessee was to receive that type of coaching and to learn and to improve his game in a lot of different areas. But I just, it feels like some of the same mistakes he's making right now are the mistakes he was making in November or in December. Like it doesn't seem like there's been growth in some areas for him. It just seems like to me, I don't know if he's pressing too hard because he's trying too hard, or if he's just playing reckless because he just, again, thinks he can do some things that he just can't. But I'm curious your thoughts on it, Gene, as someone who, has watched the game more than I have and whatnot. But I just think that, I don't know, it's a curious case with him, because I definitely think he's very talented. And when he taps into that talent and that potential, boy, he looks really good out there on the court. But he just, I don't know. It just seems like he makes a lot of freshman mistakes, I guess. Maybe he's just, like I said, maybe his basketball IQ just isn't where I expect it to be. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's quite that. I made what I thought was a very smart point going into the 2020-21 season.
Yeah, pat your stuff on the back, Gene.
I said, yes, I am right now. No, but I don't even know if smart's the word I'm thinking of, but it was a very forward-thinking point, I'll say. It was the class with Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson. And what I said was the players that the players that Jaden Springer is going to be playing with a different type of basketball player that he's accustomed to. And people got really mad and they got frustrated. How dare you? So that's why, Ben McKee leads the way on it. That rapscallion. He used to make the joke that if you type in IMG in Tennessee, like you'll see a bunch of references to me, and because the point that I was making was the caliber of player, the caliber of athlete that Jaden Springer was playing with at Tennessee. I'm sorry, at IMG. That was going to change, and that style was going to change once he got to Tennessee. The caliber of athlete, just simply athlete, at IMG was higher, in my opinion, than what was at Tennessee. Especially going into last year, there was Jaden Springer, Eve Pons, Keon Johnson. Josiah is a nice athlete, but he's not explosive like that. So kids like that who are point guards, they've got the ball in their hands. They catch the ball, man. Hey, You play for IMG, you play for Sunrise Christian. That's a show. So you're a point guard. You get the ball out. You're running the ball up the court. You're looking for somebody to throw that lob to. So I think a lot of, and so that was the point I was making with Jaden. And so as I move that to Kennedy, like you watch him, and I think there are times where he's getting it out. He's like, who's coming with me? And sometimes there's just not anybody there with him. He's pushing because he's a point guard. He's pushing that ball up court because he's a point. But like the rest of the guys, like let's be honest, it's not as fast. Like, I mean, look, man, John Fulkerson is, I say it sounds silly. Everybody's made the joke about his age, but he is like, it's not like Fulkerson was ever out here running 4 threes.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah. So the speed of the game, the speed at which Kennedy Chandler can play with, he catches the ball and he's weaving and he's looking, and all of a sudden he gets down court and he's like, yo, I don't have anybody with me. So what do I do? Like sometimes you may be able to make a shot, but I do think there's a number of like turnovers and mistakes and things that happen because, like, again, if you're a point guard, your thing is get the ball out, let's run, let's ride, and those opportunities don't always exist there, like in Tennessee, because like the guys are trying to get up there with you, but they're just not, like, they're not capable of it. And so I think a part of what has to happen is he kind of needs to slow down, but at the same time, yeah, in some aspects, I understand, like, you're almost taking away a little bit of who he is as a player because he's trying to get the ball up court quick. He's not wanting that defense to get set because that's what point guards are always thinking. Like true point guards, they're like, man, don't let him get set. Don't let him get set. And especially with his speed. I mean, if I was him, I wouldn't even worry about like passing the ball. Hey, I'll take a missed shot over a turnover any day. Let's go to my stat sheet. I mean, and yeah, you want him to be under control and you want that. But man, like that's like you want, if you're a point guard, you want to get that ball and you want to go. And that's what he's always been trained. When he was at Briarcrest, when he was at Sunrise, when he's been playing AAU, I'm assuming he played for somebody like Team Thad, or I don't know who he played for, but I know he played for one of the elite AAU programs in the country. I don't have to ask. You're the number one point guard in the country. I know he played elite. He's always played for elite programs. That's who he is. That's what he's been. And so he's always played with elite athletes. And if you're, again, I would love to play with the point guard like that because he's getting the ball out in 4 seconds. He's down court. I mean, like, heck, as I got to college, I became a good shooter. Somebody like Vescovy, I'm sprinting to a spot because Chandler's not. It's not like he's selfish.
If I'm a guy like Vescovy, to a lesser extent, maybe Josiah. Like guys like Chandler and Zeigler, with the speed that they want to get up and down the court, you feed off of that. Like that's stuff you feed off of because if you're a trailer, if you're somebody like Vescovy, all the wide open shots you're getting because of a guy like Chandler who was forcing the defense to hurry up and get back. Because if they don't, he's going to go in for a layup. He's going to dump it down to somebody like Olivier, Fulkerson, Urosh, somebody like that, Huntley Hatfield for a dunk. But you can also, drop it back to the trailer for a three. So again, I think it's hard. It's why a lot of times you don't see the best of point guards in their freshman year. Like you see some great situations, you see some great stories. Like again, Kyrie played 8 games for Duke, or maybe it was 11 or 13. It's one of those, like, it was very low. It wasn't half the season. You'll see some performances where you're just like, wow. But a lot of times those guys are also in situations where there aren't great players around them. Like, Garland at Vanderbilt. There weren't a bunch of great players around him, so he had to go for 20 and 7. He chose that. Like all over on the girls' side. Like Ryan Howard, she couldn't put up those numbers at Tennessee because you're surrounded by great players. So, like a guy like Chandler, you're going to see his highs, you're going to see his lows because he's not a 5-star. He's a freshman now. It's already happened. It's already been done. So, so again, I don't think it's an IQ thing. I think it's just a style thing that he's just always been programmed to catch the ball and go because he's a small point guard. He can create, he's there to try to create for other people. It's just, again, he makes a lot of mistakes because he's a freshman. What probably wouldn't hurt if he came back for a second year, but I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody expects him to, because maybe that's something you can. But that benefits Tennessee. That doesn't benefit Kennedy Chandler.
Yeah,
that benefits. Yeah, and so that's the difference there. So I don't think the kid's gonna be back, but he's a kid who you watch him and you're just like, you see enough there to where you remain optimistic about him. Like the things that he does do well. He's unselfish. He can shoot. He's sometimes inconsistently shooting, but he's done a good job, and he's done a good job of playmaking for others. So I think his overall season's been good. I don't think like I said a few weeks ago on the podcast, I don't think there's been much gap between him and Zeigler. I don't. I think they're the same sort of player. They're just kind of different, in terms of different size. But they're both aggressive point guards that do great things. By the way, Nathanael, did you read that story from the Knoxville News Sentinel?
Yes, I did. And before we get to it, I want to say thanks for the explanation, because I feel like that makes me feel better about a little bit about Chandler. It makes me feel, I guess, maybe a little worse about the whole team. But I think it's a good point about Chandler. I mean, it's more maybe a reflection on the lack of athleticism / top end talent on the rest of Tennessee's roster than it is on Chandler. So I think that helped me a lot. And hopefully it helped the listeners too, because I think that kind of opens my eyes a little bit and kind of readjust my positioning there. But yes, no, that piece by Mike Wilson in Knox News, oh, that was fantastic. I'm glad you brought it up. I know we're going to talk about it anyway, but I think this is a perfect transition into it. For those of you who hadn't read it yet, I imagine most of you listening probably have, or watching probably have, but I'll link it in the show notes, the description of the podcast. And I'll link it in the YouTube description on the video too. But Mike Wilson did a fantastic piece with Zakai Zeigler and his mom, talking about basically his time in New York and just him growing up and the difficulties he had taking a train to go pursue his dream of playing basketball, Gene, and the whole story behind all of that, and the fact that the whole way he got to the Peach Jam and how that was how he got discovered, and how that almost didn't even happen, just all this different stuff about how he had to fight tooth and nail to get to where he could even get discovered. But now he's at Tennessee, and now he's like, you and I had talked. I remember when Tennessee got the commitment from Zeigler and he signed with Tennessee, and I talked to the coaches he had at their prep year, or not prep year, where he came from high school, and talked to his, the head coach and one of the assistant coaches over there who had coached with him, and how much they praised him and said that the quote that always stands out to me from that interview, it was in the little audiogram thing I did for it too, was the coach said that Zeigler is not afraid of the fire. He's not one of those guys that sees a fire, runs away from it. He's going to run into the fire because he's not afraid. And I think that was a perfect, and that to me got me excited the moment I heard that phrase. And that to me has been the perfect descriptor of him in his time at Tennessee. He runs into the fire and is not afraid of it at all. And I think to me, he's already becoming, or already is, I think, probably the favorite on this team, besides, I guess, maybe Fulkerson, because he's been here so long, and Fulky's just, from here. And it's a different type of feeling when you have a guy who's been around the program for as long as Fulkerson has, and he's from the state and whatnot. That's a little different. And I think probably aside from Fulkerson, Zeigler's Tennessee fans' favorite. And it's not just because he's a good player, but his attitude, it's his energy, it's the way it's the him reaching out and tickling the Florida player's nose and his arm. It's him the other day against Texas A&M where that was Kennedy Chandler. No, it was Zeigler. Yeah, he made the guy, he broke his ankles and then he pulled up and shot the three and drained it, and then the fans went crazy. He has the perfect attitude to where, not like a Marshall Henderson where he's like legit crazy, but he has like the kind of close to what I would say like the Keldon Johnson for Auburn, where opposing fan bases are going to hate him because he is very intense, and I want to say, I guess Zeigler is kind of boisterous, but he's a guy that opposing fan bases loathe. But if he's on your team, oh, you love him. And just like, look at Maverick Schofield. He was a guy that opposing fan bases did not like because he would mouth off and he was gritty and all this different stuff. But Tennessee fans love Admiral. In fact, I think, I might run a poll and see. I think Vol fans might actually like Admiral, have talking about favorites of the Rick Barnes era. I think Iowa might actually edge out Grant Williams in terms of so far being the favorites of the Rick Barnes era at Tennessee. But to get back to Zeigler, I mean, Gene, you and I, we talked from the start of how we thought this kid was going to be something good. I didn't expect him to be as good right now and immediately as he has been. But you and I always thought that there was a chance that he was going to develop into a guy that fans would love and develop into a just really good, just steady, consistent player at Tennessee. He has exceeded my expectations for his true freshman season. But I also at the same time can't say I'm like shocked at it just based off of what you and I looked at from his film, me talking to his coaches back when he committed and signed with Tennessee, and just knowing his personality, especially now. That piece that Mike Wilson did, like, if you already really like Zakai Zeigler, go read that article because it'll make you like him even more and make you like his mom especially too. But he's just, I always like getting to know athletes beyond the court, beyond the field, and kind of who they are as people. And I think now with the NIL and stuff, that's going to be easier to do now more than ever. But I think Zeigler has a chance to go down as probably one of the top, fan favorites of Tennessee basketball, potentially maybe ever, at least in like the modern era, because I don't expect him to ever put up like Chris Lofton numbers or Grant Williams numbers or things like that. But I think he'll be a steady, consistent guy who's going to be a maybe all SEC like second team player at some point in his career. But he's just going to be a guy that, I mean, look at Dame Bradshaw. He was never the flashiest player, but Vans loved him because of the effort he gave and the grit that he had. And if he had been on some better teams for his whole career, he'd be remembered even more fondly than he already is. But I think Zeigler is a guy that fans already love. And I think they're going to just, if he stays here 3-4 years, I mean, he's going to be a guy that, I mean, he can go, he wouldn't be able to go anywhere in Knoxville and have to pay for anything. He get anything he wants for free because people will be buying him stuff constantly. And now they can do it for free, or they can do it legally to an extent with the NIL stuff. I mean, even after he graduates too.
So I think it's, like the guys that you kind of mentioned before, it kind of goes in tune with the Josiah conversation. It's always expectations versus reality, and a guy like Zeigler comes in, I think he's only listed like a 3-star or whatever. So people didn't expect anything from him. And so now all of a sudden, I mean, again, we talked on the podcast, I flatly said, you're not going to be able to convince that kid he's not just as good as Kennedy Chandler. You're not going to be able to convince him. And that's not even knowing the story. And I text Mike yesterday morning when I read the story. I thought it was a great, an amazing piece. And it was. Just because, I mean, I wanted to take the time to read it. And it was very, very much, it was well worth the read. Because, like, that's a kid who's hungry. That's a kid who you'll never, I mean, you can't convince me doesn't belong now. But the thing is, you remain, like, as the story ended, when his mom came down to Knoxville and she thought she was going to learn Knoxville, and instead she ended up at Pratt Pavilion because that's where he's always at. And that's the type of stuff that just shows, like, there's a hunger. I mean, it shows the hunger of the kid. It shows you watch how he plays. That's not by accident how that kid plays. Like, I mean, I don't mean like the all the quote unquote antics, for lack of a better word. I just mean just how he plays. Like, that's earned confidence because of the work that the kid puts in every single day. He has an opportunity to go up against, again, a quote unquote 5-star, a guy. Like, I say quote unquote because I know that's his ranking, but when you get to college, I don't care what your ranking is. It's 1,000% irrelevant. Look at the guys who get drafted after about the first 3 to 5 picks. A lot of those guys are not 5-stars. John Morant could be an MVP. As an MVP candidate, he had 0 stars. So you get to college, nobody cares about your stars except for people who want to write people. But like Zeigler, his story is amazing. The type of player that he's been to date, averaging 8 points a game in 20 minutes essentially. I think it was 7.6 and 19.7 to be exact, whatever. But again, I think the greatest compliment for Zakai Zeigler is the fact that there's like little to no drop off when if Chandler goes out the game and Zeigler goes in. Mm-hmm. And that's in part recruiting, because he blew up at that Peach Jam, which, my God, I think that's like the end of July, 1st of August. Like, I know the time frame was crazy in general, but I mean, like, that's a kid who, again, what was it, 4 months prior, just had essentially decided he wasn't even going to pursue college basketball. And that's how quickly things can change for a player. That's how quickly things can change. And so, like, that's a kid who literally went, I mean, heck, in a number of ways, literally went from having nothing to having everything he's ever wanted in the span of, what, 3 years? So if you think that kid's done, because I mean, I think sophomore year was when he moved to the new school and he was riding I don't want to give away the story. Like his sophomore year was where a lot of stuff changed for him, and so now look at him. Like that's a kid who is going to be so appreciative of everything he's been given. He's you can't convince him of you can't convince him anything different. You can't convince him he doesn't belong. You can't convince him he doesn't deserve everything he's getting. You can't convince him any of that stuff because of the type of player, because of his upbringing, because of just everything he's gone through to get to this point. Like going into Rupp Arena or going into Allen Fieldhouse or Cameron Indoor or wherever they may go the rest of the way, like you can't shake him. Like he was as good of a player as Tennessee had on the court when they played at Alabama. I understand they didn't win the game. He was as good of a player that was on the court that day. And because it was just him that day. Because that's when Chandler was gone, that's when Fulkerson was gone. So, like again, I can't say enough about how great that story was. I think, journalism at its core, it's not about hot takes, it's about telling stories of people. And you can complain all you want to about certain things that happen, but like that was an amazing story that told a story of a kid that you would not otherwise know. Because now look at all the exposure that's about to happen. Anytime Tennessee's on national television, as Zakai Zeigler gets in, you don't think that was it Tom Hart or whatever the guy's name is? You don't think that Jimmy Dykes? You don't think that these guys that are doing broadcasts are going to bring it up anytime that story gets mentioned? Anytime Zakai Zeigler's name gets mentioned, that's positive publicity for the program. There's so many bad things that you can say about kids not on Tennessee. But across the country, bad stories that if people wanted to kind of dive into or whatever, they could perhaps. So many bad things that people feel is going on in the world of college athletics. If you can talk about a story like that on a broadcast, you're going to. And so again, last thing, like shout out again to Mike, because that was extremely well done.
Yeah, and again, I'll link that in the podcast description here and also in the YouTube description too. But yeah, I really admire his ego. It's not just the whole thing that you said, like his attitude, like his play and all that sort of stuff. I admired like his work ethic, and I admire his never say die attitude. And like you said, like he's been asked, I think 2 or 3 times now at the end of games, like, how did you respond to that environment, whatever. And he's like, dude, I played up in the streets in New York, like nothing's going to faze me. And I don't know how many more times he's going to say that before people realize that, I'm just going to stop asking him this question because I know what the answer is going to be. And it wasn't even just that, like you said, like the way he grew up and all this different stuff, like he's not going to be fazed, man. You can say what you want to him, do what you want, be as loud as you want in an arena. Can go up to Rupp, obviously, and play in front of those crowds and go when, not this year, but maybe next year when they play Auburn at Auburn, like as loud as that arena can be. He's unflappable. He's not going to be a guy who's going to wilt under pressure. To me, he's like Lamonte Turner in that respect. Like I never worried about Lamonte Turner, the moment being too big for him. He's always a guy that I thought had that pit bull mentality where he never wilted under pressure. He was a guy that I knew that even if he missed a shot, like he was a guy that I trusted to take that shot because I knew that he had the confidence in himself and he had the attitude that, even if he missed it, it's not going to let him. You have some mentality, like you miss shots over and over again. It will get to eventually, but like I always trusted in Lamonte to bounce back if something bad happened. I'm going to trust Zeigler to do the same thing if anything bad happens, like in a game. He's not a guy that I feel like I have to worry about making the same mistake twice, really. He's a freshman, so he's learning out there, and he is undersized. He does have limitations, but like he's been solid, man. In the games this season that Tennessee's played in the SEC, or I guess really the last 10 games, counting the Texas game too. Like he scored double figures in 3 straight games, in 4 of the last 5. He's not I guess he has gotten actually a lot more consistent in his 3-point shooting. In his last 10 games, he's shooting 30%, but his last 5 games, he's shooting a lot better than that. He's shooting close to 50%, I think, in his last 5 or 6 games. But over the last 10, he's averaging 8.8. He's averaging 2.5 rebounds, which for being 5'8", 5'9", that's impressive. 2.5 assists, 2 steals per game. Again, making 30% of his threes, making 90% of his free throws. Like, he's a really good free throw shooter. He's also I think that's gotten lost, but he's attempted 39 free throws this year, has made 33 of them. Like, he's only missed 6 of his 39 free throws that he's attempted this year. He's Tennessee's best free throw shooter. I don't think it's even that close. He's a guy who in that Vanderbilt game didn't make a single field goal, was 0 for 8, but he finished with 11 points because he was 11 of 12 from the free throw line. So he got to the bucket or got to the basket plenty of times. He got plenty of drawn fouls in that game too. So, I mean, he's just a guy that he's been surprising, but also not surprising to me. And like you said, I agree 100% with you. Journalism to me too, as someone who was in sports media for a long time, of course, you're still in it, clearly, Gene, as your main job. It's about telling stories, and it's about finding emotion in humanity and finding the humanity in humanity and bringing that out and letting other people see it and connecting people and saying, hey, we're all more similar than we are different. And I think that's a big part of journalism, and especially when it's done right, is telling these unique stories that otherwise you wouldn't know. And Mike Wilson was on the Swain event on Thursday morning, and he said he's got, got to give credit to Zakai and his mom, because interviews are only as good as the person being interviewed their willingness to be open about their story. And he said credit to both of them, because they both were very open and honest about their stories. And I thought that was a good point too. But I think we're in this. We've done this for close to an hour now. I know, Gene, you've got to go do something else here too, so I'll go ahead and end the podcast here. But again, thank you all so much for listening. Go check that piece out. And I also do want to mention too that Tennessee plays South Carolina on Saturday, and we didn't really get to this talking point, but again, Tennessee has an easier schedule coming up. It's at South Carolina. It's a road game. It's gonna be tough. At Mississippi State will be tough. They host Vandy, host Kentucky, at Arkansas, at Missouri, host number 1 Auburn. Will probably be number 1 by that point still, maybe. We'll see. At Georgia, and host Arkansas to end the year. So your road trips or your toughest road trips are out of the way. Mississippi State and Arkansas will still be tough, but it's not going to be the same as a Kentucky, LSU, and Bama. But I think Tennessee will have a better close than they did to start in SEC play. But again, that's where we end this episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We are very, very appreciative of all the support you've given us here at Vol Basketball Fever. Signing off for Gene, I'm Nathanael, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.